undersold his intelligence, and he'll do the rest. But like we make the simple complex. Right. This dude needs information. Dude needs information. Dude needs information. Let's go!
Classy.
Alrighty. How is everyone? Good morning. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully, we're all having a good day, and we're excited for this workshop that we have today here, brought to you by Functional Training Zone. So you guys can know, my name is Dr. Felix Martinez Sanchez. I am the Community Liaison Coordinator for Functional Training Zone, and I'm also a certified police officer for the state of Maryland. I work in a municipality here in Prince George's County. I am one of their community engagement officers. I'm also one of our grant specialists for the department. I've been in law enforcement for the last 10 years of my life. I've done different jobs such as corrections, where I worked on the medium maximum unit. I've worked in the Department of Probation, where I worked with sex offenders. I've worked in campus police, and currently I'm also an adjunct lecturer at Howard University as part of their School of Criminology and Sociology. And I'm just very excited to be here. I'm excited to have you guys on, to have this great conversation about, law enforcement, the career, where we come from when it comes to where the passion comes from for law enforcement and where we are today. So without further ado, if Ms. Campbell can go on and introduce herself.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Corrine Campbell, and I am an investigator with the federal government. I do international investigations. I work with the Department of Trade. And what we do is companies that seek to do business in our country, they have to pay certain duties and fees. And if those duties and fees are too much, they'll try to evade or avoid paying them, and they may misrepresent information. And so oftentimes companies will say a product is made in another country when it's made in a country that requires a lot of duties. So what I'll do is I'll assemble a team and I'll go to that country that they're claiming that the good is made at, and we'll do investigations. We'll investigate or interrogate or interview different members within that business community. I've been in law enforcement for about 15 years now, but I've been doing this particular work for the last 4 years. And I'm really happy to be here.
Happy to have you. Mr. Lynch.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jonathan Russell Lynch. I started my law enforcement career in 2008. I was working as a seasonal police officer for Delaware. That's one of the things I was going to talk about later. One of the good opportunity to get into law enforcement is as a seasonal officer. I did that for 2 years. Then I transitioned into the Marine Corps, served for 4 years, got out of the Marine Corps, and then I joined where I met Mr. Robinson. I became a federal police officer for the U.S. Mint. Did that for about 3.5 years and transitioned out. Now I'm in the private sector for project management for an energy company. So kind of shows you where you can end up with a kind of a unique background. But very honored to be here, and I appreciate the invite. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Happy to have you. Quincy?
Yeah. My name is Quincy Robertson. I am the president of Functional Training Zone. I work in security and countermeasures for Treasury Department. I also spent a lot of time around law enforcement with diplomatic security, Capitol Police, and a few other agencies prior to work for Treasury. Thank you for having me.
Alrighty. So this is Miss Miss Robinson, did you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, I can definitely introduce myself. I'm here strictly in a listening capacity. I am not part of law enforcement. I'm here in support of all of you to just listen to what your perspectives are, your views are, and just to provide feedback to Functional Training Zone, board members as to how the presentation went today.
Happy to have you here. So pretty much right now, we all have on this call pretty much have some type of law enforcement experience. And we know that when we started off, it was always, we either had a passion for it or someone try to like lead us into the way. But today we really want to get into that story, to that understanding. What made you choose law enforcement? What made you choose investigations or federal police? What was that mindset like? And then when you got to the opportunity, how was it? Because I know for me, I always said I wanted to be a police officer, and then the academy came, and I was like, what in the world did I sign myself into? And it was definitely, it was an eye-opener for me. And I'm just really excited that we're going to have this conversation, because we're Functional Training Zone. What we're trying to do is bring up we're a career readiness program. We're a not-for-profit. We're trying to bring pretty much a different outlook to people. We're trying to show people what it is to get into different jobs, careers, understand the pros and cons, benefits, and what are the daily duties of these said jobs, correct? Because a lot of times we think we know what we want to get into until we get there. And it's like, wait, I did all this schooling and this is not what I expected. So, that's what Functional Training Zone brings. We give the opportunity through different workshops to understand the ins and outs of the job so that you're making the best decision for yourself. But I'm gonna hand the mic off to Mr. Robinson.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for joining today. We're really focusing on the law enforcement perspective for career awareness, our career awareness workshop, and other opportunities in law enforcement that are not necessarily police. We are attempting to help people find their way, give them guidance, give them those critiques and really critical information when it comes to different types of career fields and the minimum requirements to access those fields. So we're happy to have you all on today to talk about your experiences and your education and just things you've been through from the start to where you are now, in order to help somebody make an informed decision about joining your career field. Thank you.
I think we could start off with the very first question. If I think either one want to jump in first, why law enforcement? What made you decide to get into law enforcement?
Well, I guess I can go first. Law enforcement wasn't exactly my first choice. It was actually chosen for me. My mom, well, now that I think about it, all of my careers were chosen for me. My mother was a social worker, and she had 3 daughters. And she believed that all 3 of her daughters should get a social work degree because it would make us more marketable. So all of her 3 daughters have social work degrees, and we were in fact marketable. But I also had a lot of friends who worked for the federal government, and they themselves had a choice of where I should work. And so they started filling out my application for me, and I did the rest. So that is really what led me into law enforcement. My friends felt like I had enough of that social work life and that I needed to be in the law enforcement field with them. So it's a different journey than it seems like some of you.
It's an interesting journey, I'll tell you that much. It's different. Mr. Lynch?
I ever since I was younger, I really liked the feeling of making people feel safe. And I know, unfortunately, that's not something that we always associate with police now. But I did really enjoy that feeling of knowing that when I helped somebody, that they would feel safe, which is why I kind of based all of my papers in school and all of my approaches as a police officer. I was really big into community policing, which I'm sure you're going to touch on. But I really enjoyed interacting with people in the neighborhood. I wanted people in a certain area to know my name. I wanted to talk to the store owners, and I wanted to try to help people at a personal level. But in law enforcement, we already know you can't change the world. And as much as we try, there's too much crime for police to solve. But if I can make that connection with a small group of people and focus on like a single area or a single neighborhood, or get one child back to a parent, then that feeling to me was worth it. And that was the whole start of where that calling for law enforcement came from for me.
I definitely hear you on that one. Community policing is my baby. That is what I truly believe in. The reason why I joined policing was because, well, there's a lot of reasons. I've always had this want to be a police officer because I said, wow, it looks amazing. You're out there helping people and you have this nice car. Because when you're young, all you're thinking about is the flashy stuff, right? I was 6. I was like, well, look at that cruiser. Look at that badge. What does that mean? I didn't know what I was getting myself into. But it really came home to me when I was walking one evening, not even, it's about 5 o'clock. So walking one day and I was just with my friends, what normal teenagers do. You're just walking around chilling, just trying to go to wherever you're going. And we started hearing shots. And I grew up in Jamaica, Queens, New York. So, I mean, it was a very tough neighborhood. But, where I wasn't where the usual things happen. So we heard shots. So, of course, when you hear shots, you start running. Now, as a law enforcement officer, we run towards the shots. I was in my teens. I was running away from the shots. But as the shots got closer, I was pushed off by a friend by the name of Emilio, and he ended up getting shot in the back of his neck. He ended up dying in front of me. So ever since that day, I said, I need to be another person out there to try to investigate, try to find who did this, because we shouldn't be losing people due to gun violence. There's no need for this. You feel me? There's just absolute no need for it. So it took a little bit, but took a long time. But we're finally here. That really pushed me to the edge. So, I always wanted to become an investigator. And as time has rolled on, now I want to be the chief of police one day, but all in due time. But definitely, I think that was the defining moment that I knew I had to be a police officer. So it's been a great ride.
Hey, Felix, I can go through some of the questions that I have. I wanted to kind of spread the questions out for some of our listeners and for some of our students to kind of get a feel for who you guys are and your personality and things like that. So my next question, and we can keep the same order going, starting with Ms. Campbell. What was really a difficult journey process when you enter your career field? What kind of obstacles did you experience when attempting to join and when you were new?
Well, like I said, my friends worked primarily in the federal government agency, so it actually was fun. I was going to work with my friends. The obstacle that I faced was not everybody liked my friends when I found out. And some of my friends had some pretty high ranking positions. On the outside looking in, I used to always go to the parties and I had fun with these people. But when you having fun with people and working with them is a whole different story. And so once I made it in and I was amongst my friends, I found that not everybody was very friendly. And as a result, I became a target because I was the new person. And I had to make it past my year to have any safety. So I was getting bombarded by a lot of resistance to me being there. And it wasn't until I clawed my way past my year that I found out that I was getting a lot of resistance because of my associations. And so that was probably the biggest obstacle. I like things that challenge me. So coming from social work and helping people, it was a natural progression to go into law enforcement because I help people. But in the trade arena, and when you're working with merchandise and not so much a tangible person, translating my social work skills into that law enforcement mindset was also a challenge too. And it required me to really do a lot of studying and observing. So ultimately that challenge turned into a positive, but it was dealing with those people that was really difficult.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Martinez?
Well, getting in was fun. I mean, so again, the Lord works in very mysterious ways, but I tried to join a few police departments and it just never really worked out. I tried the NYPD, didn't work out for a few years. One of the hardest things that people don't understand is that depending on where you're applying to is a process. So we're talking about you got to filling out the application is just the very beginning of it all. And I'm pretty sure my federal private people can tell you it is a lot that goes on with it's the application process, your background story. That's a dissertation in itself. They want to know everyone, and I'm Dominican. I have over 60 uncles, cousins. They want to know about everybody. So you're writing everybody. They want to know their social. Like there is just too much going on here. I'm trying to become a police officer. What is going on? Like I didn't understand the process. So you got to do the blue book. You got to do the application process. You got to go through a polygraph. You got to go through the physical. And what people don't understand is that depending on where you're applying in New York, after a certain amount of time, you're going to have to redo most of these processes because your time has elapsed. So the physical, I think it was like every 4 to 6 months, you're supposed to go do the physical. So going up the fence, pushing and dragging and running. And I mean, you would think that, you'll be ready for it. But the day before, you just went to a psychological exam and you were there for about 12 hours writing and answering questions, about 1,400 questions. And it's a process. So I did that about 4 times for the NYPD. And then I decided to move because I needed to go to Maryland. I said I needed to buy a house. So just applying, understanding that there's a lot of paperwork that's involved. I remember on one application, I did the hearing test and they wanted to tell me I was deaf because I couldn't hear the lowest thing. I'm like, listen, if people are calling for help, they're not going to whisper it. I guarantee you they're not going to whisper it. But I just think it was the paperwork involved was very interesting. It was definitely a challenge. And once we got through it, the academy, but we'll get to that conversation about the academy. But during the job, I think the biggest obstacle was trying to break that barrier, breaking that bridge, fixing the bridge, right? We're trying to hone that community-oriented policing format. And a lot of people didn't have that trust with police, but we're getting there.
All right. Okay, thank you. Thank you for your input. I appreciate you. Mr. Lynch, same question, please.
So this is important because people in the DMV, and I know everyone on this call, I believe you're all still located up there. I left DC in 2020, I moved down to Florida, but my biggest obstacle by far was I overestimated my resume. I thought coming out of the Marine Corps, having prior law enforcement, and I was even rare that I had an associate's degree. And I told my wife, I'm like, I'm just waiting for these guys to call me. Like, it's surprised they even made me fill out an application. And she's like, this is one of the most overqualified areas in the country. She's like, there's people with master's degrees applying to be police officers. There's people with PhDs applying. And I didn't listen to her and I applied. And there was a line pretty much of other veterans who had law enforcement, who had associate's degrees. There was nothing special about my resume. So I had to go back. I got my bachelor's degree. That helped set me out a little bit. And then, we talk about later internships. That's the 100% the reason I got hired on with the federal government is because I did an internship there. But for me, the biggest struggle by far, thinking that I was special compared to the hundreds of other applicants applying for single positions. It's not like it was 20 or 30 years ago when you talk to the older police officers. Even the folks I worked with, one guy, the application was closed. He gave him $20 and she put the application in. I said, it's not like that anymore. You're going up against hundreds of people. You might not talk to a person in the application process, months until, you get 6 months into it. So just like Mr. Martinez said, it's a very lengthy process and you really have to stand out. So you can almost stress yourself out before you even get your foot in the door. So that was mine for me.
Awesome. Great story, man. Great insight. Our next question is, what are some of the major requirements around accessing the career field in law enforcement?
So within the federal government, you have to set up your profile through USA Jobs. That's the initial entree. And they don't make it very easy for you. They really don't. Fortunately, I started my career in Newark, New Jersey. And so the playing field was a bit smaller. I probably would have the same issue with as Mr. Lynch stated, if I came straight to the DMV and tried to enter into law enforcement, because my social work degree, even though I have a master's in social work, there are people who have PhDs in criminology. I wouldn't even be considered. So I was able, with the help of my friends, to be able to know how to fill out that USA job profile, use the words that were required, that the computer would pick up and allow me to meet the different levels. And in fact, I work with people who say they have an interest, and I help them to re-evaluate how they're answering questions in the USA job process, so that the computer, because that's the first level of defense, is to vet out the thousands of applications that come through by the computer algorithm. And I'm by no means a guru in this, but I do know that you have to use those words that the computer is going to recognize to get to the next level. And then once you get to the next level, then you can kind of talk your way into anything. But definitely having an advanced degree, the higher the better. That helps. In my capacity now, I do a lot of writing. So being able to have and have great writing skills and speaking skills, that's important too. And then also being able to understand legal jargon. My job is really technical, and I'm involved in a lot of legal cases and lawyers and judges. And so that's another level of expertise that would be beneficial to this position.
Thank you. Awesome. Mr. Martinez, same question. What are some of the major requirements around accessing a career field in law enforcement?
I mean, the number one thing is, so in Maryland, we're in a very interesting situation. We have the county police, but then every county has municipalities. So here it's a different application for every single location. It's different requirements for every single location. So some police departments, they'll post it up on their employment page, kind of like a regular job, but then every single location has a different requirement for their physical agility test. Some require it, some don't. Some will require you to have a certain amount of years of experience. Some of them are just looking for someone brand new. So, I mean, every department has a website that you could just go on and just try to read into. And right now, not a lot of people want to be the police. So it's changed from what Mr. Lynch has said, from what it was before. In the federal government, it's still very hard. But on the local level, they're trying to make it as easy and as feasible as possible, because at this point, we're trying to get bodies and we're short. So it's just going on their webpage, following the application process. You still have to do the psychological and all that good, long, drawn out stuff, but everything's on different. Everyone has their own requirements.
Got you. Would you say, going back to something you just said a while ago, with every municipality have their own unique qualifiers, right? Would you say that not every law enforcement position is transferable?
I wouldn't say it's not. I think you have to have, when you're a cop, you have to have basic skills. I mean, that's throughout, no matter where you work. A cop's a cop, no matter where you are, because the law is a law. Now, obviously, there's different laws that you have to follow, but I think it's always transferable. It's just when you get to that new location, you just have to adapt to where you are in a sense of the community and their rules and regulations. But the basic skills of police officer is transferable.
Gotcha. Mr. Lynch, same question, please.
Yeah, just touching on what Mr. Martinez said, I agree that it is sometimes frustrating when you're trying to transfer to different spots because federally it's a little bit easier. I'll mention many times, but FLETC is the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. They train over 91 federal agencies there, and they all go through the same uniform police training program. It's called UPTP. Once you have that UPTP certification, you can go to another state and apply as a federal police officer. So in that regards, at the federal level, it is kind of easy to transfer. But take for me example, when I left from DC, I was waving around my FLETC certificate, and everything down here requires local certification. So even if you have a FLETC certificate and you've graduated from UPTP, you still have to get, just like Mr. Martinez was saying, you still have to recertify at the state level. So if I wasn't going to take a federal job down here and I wanted to do something locally, they kind of disregard your qualifications and you're going to have to recertify through the state. You're going to have to do what's called a equivalency exam. You're going to have to take the state exam. But just like he said, the skills of a police officer can take you anywhere. So as long as you have those basic skill sets, you're still going to have to go through another application. But in terms of ease of transferring, I would recommend federal because that's going to be the easiest to just, like we were talking about USA Jobs, jump on there, find out the state, the area that you want to work, and then you can just kind of upload your resume and those qualifications transfer pretty easily.
Got you, understood. So there's not a lot of reciprocity going on between the states and between organizations.
Yeah, there's federally, like even if I wanted to go from being a uniformed police officer to what's called an 1811, which would be a criminal investigator in the federal government, that requires additional schooling at FLETC. So the UPTP would have to go to what's called CITP, Criminal Investigative Training Program. But you could serve as a federal detective or a federal investigator. And then if you wanted to go something at the state level, they would probably still make you recertify at the state level because at that point, they don't want any liability of saying, oh, we thought this guy was good. He had all these certs from the federal government and he turned out to be an idiot and he got somebody killed. We didn't certify him at our level. So that's just for them to cover themselves. But unfortunately, you see people slip through the cracks all the time. A lot of people just want to make sure it's not in their backyard and it's not for their fault. So.
Understood. Makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. Thank you. My next question coming up. Ms. Campbell, could you walk me through a typical workday for yourself and what kind of things stand out to you that someone should know about entering your field and what typically a normal workday looks like, and even a workday that's not normal? Can you kind of bring us through that process?
Well, my position is mandated congressionally. So I have very strict guidelines and deadlines in doing my job. And so my investigation has to conclude at the 300th day. So it's very high paced, very fast paced rather. And so I have to initially start my investigation anonymously. And so the companies that I'm investigating, they don't know that I'm launching this investigation, and I'm working with different partners internationally as well as locally to get some information about the different companies that I'm investigating. And then I meet a threshold in my case where I go on the record and I let them know that I've been investigating them. And so I get a lot of pushback, a lot of feedback, a lot of resistance from companies that have been investigated unknowingly. I'm also assembling teams. So I'm assembling teams of auditors. I'm assembling teams of subject matter experts on the different products or companies that I'm investigating. And so I do a lot of talking. I do a lot of talking, a lot of Zoom meetings now because of the current state of affairs. And I do a lot of writing. And so again, like I said, very fast paced. We also do a lot of reports at different benchmarks. And so these reports have to be very comprehensive. They have to summarize in legal jargon all of my actions from the time that I started to the point that I write this report. And then when I have to write my conclusionary report, I have to kind of sum all of our actions. And they don't want it to be very long. So I find it harder to write shorter than longer. And so writing, a lot of my day involves a lot of writing and reading. An unusual day for me is when I do go overseas to investigate the company. I've gone to some really awesome places, but I'm not going as a tourist. I'm going as an investigator, and I'm going to places that are not very pretty and very dirty and dangerous. So that's the unusual part. That's the challenging part, is that when I do go overseas, I'm not always going in the best circumstances, but it is still an enjoyable experience.
Awesome. Could you talk a little bit about, like, when you do have the opportunity to travel and go overseas, like what kind of additional pay is included, per diem and things like that? What is per diem and things like that, to just help listeners get an idea of, when you are traveling, what other things can they look forward to?
So because, like I said, I'm not going for fun, I have to be in places that are ensure mine and my team's safety. So we have to work with the embassies and local law enforcement to stay in some places that have the least amount of access to the outside. So we are allowed a per diem, which is a rate or a dollar amount that's prefigured by the government that would allow us to be in hotels that would create a separation from us and the public. And I am not sure of the combination that they figure, but knowing if you are staying at an Airbnb versus the Ritz-Carlton, you're going to have a higher level of security at the Ritz-Carlton than at an Airbnb. So those prices, the per diem prices, are reflected accordingly. Also, we can't just go to a restaurant and just eat at any restaurant. So our meal allowances have to reflect us going to places that's going to provide a little more security for us. And so the per diem is the amount of allowances for you to exist in another place in addition to receiving your regular pay.
Now, is that paid to you in advance or repaid to you at a later time?
Well, it's paid to us at a later time, but we're issued government credit cards. So all of our expenses, we charge our expenses, and then we submit the receipts and the justifications for our expenditures afterwards. You have 30 days to pay that bill. But again, the government and our agency is understanding that our safety is of utmost importance. And so again, we have to be in situations, even down to our transportation, that's a big consideration, because we're going into countries and into places that we don't know. So we have to work really closely with the embassies and, again, local law enforcement, even for our safety in terms of transportation. I'm reminded of one trip I was on, and the driver got lost. And so we were trying to figure out quickly if he got lost on purpose or if he was genuinely lost. And he was genuinely lost and very apologetic. But I was traveling with a team that was new to overseas travel. So I had to keep my head calm. Of course, I was concerned, but I had to remain composed because I had to remain composed for my team. And so those are the kinds of challenges that we face going overseas, because, like I said, we're not going out in resorts. And so once you pass a certain area, you just don't know. And so you're relying heavily on, those people who you never met to plan for you. But we do have federal government presence in these different countries that we go to, and we work pretty well together, but we do have to allow for occasional challenges that we face.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I remember working for diplomatic security and the regional security officer, the RSO, and having to do all kinds of escorts and stuff like that. So I definitely I understand the approach. Mr. Lynch.
So for myself, I guess one of the biggest concerns would be just like you said too. You can get paid based on it. It's going to vary wildly depending on where you're going. So for me, for example, the Marine Corps per diem was completely different because the Marine Corps is going to have a different objective and a different mission than the federal government does. This isn't bad for applicants to do this. I always encourage people to look for what you can get out of where you're applying to. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. If you're looking at a police department and they don't seem like they have the tools for you, they don't seem like they have training opportunities, they don't seem like they have the budget, you can probably guess that department or that agency is not going to be able to provide you with the per diem. They're not going to be able to give you the stipends or the bonuses or what's called cash awards. Those can be discretionary allotments that your chain of command can give you for great performance. And those just show up in your paycheck as an allotment of cash. If that department doesn't seem like they have the resources necessary, then you're probably not going to have as good of per diem. Your per diem might be $20 or $30 a day, $15 a day. I've heard of some pretty terrible ones that barely cover the price of a meal at McDonald's. Likewise, the federal government has funds allocated for training. They have funds allocated for officer development, officer improvement. So for example, FLETC, where I was mentioning the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, to send officers through there is incredibly expensive. So up front, if your agency is willing to send you there, then they have your interests in developing you as a police officer. That's room and board paid for, ammunition's paid for, uniforms are paid for, where some departments, especially during the 2008 recession, they were requiring departments to pay for their own fuel. There were some departments I talked to, for example, down in Mississippi Highway Patrol, there was a 3-year period where they didn't have money to send their officers to qualify with firearms. So you talk about a scary thought. That meant that every state trooper in the state of Mississippi for 3 years, unless they were paying to go to their range on their own dime, wasn't being provided ammunition or range paid for by their agency. So it can vary differently. Again, like Ms. Campbell said, depending on where you're going, your per diem might be higher or lower. But I always encourage applicants, look at what they can give you so you can develop yourself, because you can't invest in yourself if they're not going to invest in you.
Absolutely. So could you take me when you were working as a law enforcement professional here in the DMV area, could you tell me like what was a typical work day for you, and like how your schedule? How did you start? How did it end? What kind of mishaps happened during the day? Things like that.
Absolutely. It's very, very different from what local police officer would go through in their day. That's going to be interacting with the public. That's the calls that are dangerous. Federal government, while it's you can never say that any law enforcement profession isn't safe. It's generally what we call static post, which means that you go to roll call in the morning and they show you where you're going to be stationed within the building. And in terms of compared to what I did on the street as a local police officer in Delaware, it was drastically different. I would go to my post. I would be inside the building. I had other police officers with me. I know that the security in the building was very good because people like you were working on it. I know that there was camera coverage. I know that I had people watching me. I know, like I spoke about, we had the resources so that everything in the building was protected. The glass I knew could withstand a certain amount of damage. They had invested in our safety, which was a good feeling. But in terms of like day to day, we would just stand on post. We would screen employees and visitors as they came through. And that's just kind of an example of what, if the security is, you get what you pay for. So we were fully sworn police officers protecting that building, whereas an agency that might not have that budget might have to hire contract security guards. They might have to hire, they might have to hire somebody who might not have the level of training or the level of professionalism that we have. But in terms of day to day, for 12-hour shifts, we would stand post, we would cover different areas, we would accept deliveries, we would screen everything coming into the building so that you knew that if you were in that office, which essentially what Treasury is at the end of the day, it's a giant office building. If you were conducting business within there, you knew that every bag that came through has been screened, and you knew that every employee or every visitor that came through had been screened by us. So that was the day to day. And some people find that boring. I enjoyed that because the federal government tends to pay a lot higher than local departments will. And there's such a job security knowing that you're working for the federal government. Sometimes it seems like it takes an act of Congress to get a police officer fired from the federal government. And it can also, there's also protections against reduction in force, which is what they call RIFs. A lot of times if you do get let go or they do have to downsize the department, for a reduction in force, they have to find you an equal paying position as a police officer elsewhere. So incredible job security in the federal government, usually going to have higher pay. And while it tends to be more boring than working as a police officer on the street, you're usually just going to be on static post, means you're stationary. You might have an area outside where you're patrolling in the immediate vicinity around the building. But generally it's going to be that day after day.
Thank you. That's great. Now I know Mr. Martinez has a totally different point of view. Could you get into that, Mr. Martinez?
Man, I'm not standing around because we can't. That's not gonna happen. So local, at least where I work, I'm gonna go with my municipality. Day to day, no one really knows what you're gonna get yourself into. It's a different dynamic every single day. I've never been at a job where I just don't know what I'm getting myself into. It doesn't matter what day of the week it is. It doesn't matter what time of day it is. Something can happen at any time. So for us, we work 12-hour shifts as well. For us, we have our schedule is 2 weeks days, 2 weeks nights. So 2 weeks we're from 4:30 in the morning to 4:30 p.m. and 2 weeks 4:30 p.m. to 4:30 a.m. Right? Everyone thinks that day shift is boring. It is. I don't like day shift, but you never know what you're gonna get. So on a typical day, it's pretty much coming in. We actually don't have roll call where I work. You are just, we all, because we're such a small municipality, everyone patrols the same area. No one's designated an area. So it's usually one supervisor to 3 officers. So we have 4 per squad. So everyone's usually doing area checks depending on where you want to check it. If one person's checking Adam's sector, another person can be checking David's sector. So you're just doing your area checks, making sure everything's okay. Then you'll have your calls for service. Calls for service is when someone calls into the station and says, hey, this is happening. Hey, that's happening. And just so that viewers know, yes, we get called that there's a cat that hasn't been fed in 3 days in an apartment because the parent is in the hospital. Yes, we get calls that kids don't want to go to school. We get the accidents. We get people who are vagrants and they're in McDonald's. We get the assaults. We get it all. Sometimes it's our jurisdiction. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes we're listening to our radio and there could be an emergency at another jurisdiction. If someone calls a signal 13, that's a call for basically an emergency, we're going, no matter where it is. If an officer's in trouble, we're all going. So really it's patrolling, answering call for service. And the one part that people really don't know, we write a lot. Policing is a lot of paperwork. It is a lot of paperwork. So for a DUI, it is not what people believe, that when you see on TV where you arrest a person, they go to jail. No, ladies and gentlemen, that's not how that goes. We're gonna go, we have to make, for a DUI, you gotta make the traffic stop. You have to do SFSTs, which are extended field sobriety testing. You gotta notate everything that's going on. You're gonna then read them their right, well, put them in the car because they're under arrest at that point. read them their rights. If they decide to blow, then you got to take them to one location, do paperwork there. Then you got to go back to the station. You got to get your citations done. You got to do all your reports, which we're talking about probable cause statements. We got your narrative for your paperwork. You got to get all the admin tabs. And you do that various times because we got the booking report and then we have the case report, which is redundant, but regardless, you got to write. They say they don't want you to write a lot. Yeah, when you go to school, you write a lot, but okay, it is what it is. By the time you're done with all the paperwork for DUI, depending on where you work, you can either release them from the station with a court date pending, or if you can identify who they are, you got to take them to the jail. So there's a lot of paperwork involved. Policing it's one of the, well, the municipality level, you just don't know what you're getting yourself into. So it's literally calls for service, paperwork, and for me and for a lot of us is going to these businesses and saying, hey, I'm Officer Martinez, and I'm Dominican. So I'll go in there speaking Spanish. I'll be doing my little bachata, merengue. I just have fun. Like everyone knows who I am at this point. Yeah. I go to the school. I think every kid knows me at the elementary school, and that's not a cliche. That's literally when I get there, they know, hey, look, it's Martinez. So it's a super cool feeling. You want to make that connection. It's fun. It's a fun job. But yeah,
that's good. Could you tell me more? You say you guys have to do a lot of writing, right? Could you tell me more about the I guess the contrast of people who are good at writing and people who are not good at writing, and kind of what happens there? Are you being sent to like mandatory training? Or are you being told to, to go and qualify somewhere? Are you at home just writing, trying to, increase your skill level? Like, tell me a little bit about that, because I'm sure there's a contrast between people who can write and people who can't write, right? And since that process has to be pushed up, right, and all of it has to be submitted the same way, what happens when somebody doesn't receive a good report?
All right, so reports, you'll write them and it goes to your supervisor, your 10 car. That's what we call it. So you got a 10 car, that's the supervisor, 11 car, second in command. You got 12 and 14. I'm the 14 car because I'm the lowest one. So I'll write the report to all my admin tabs. It goes to my 10 car. My 10 car, being the supervisor, has to review everything. And then if they don't like something, or if they don't agree with something, or something is not right, they'll send it back to you and then you'll work on it. So for our department, that's pretty much the essential aspect of it. In policing, I've been doing law enforcement for a long time. So in every job I've seen, I'm sorry, officers, I'm going to be very honest right now. We can't write. we can't. It's something about policing where honestly, I think we got to add to this training. And I don't know about the federal side, but I'm talking about our side. We people don't know what a comma looks like. It is something that plagues policing. So if you go to court, you'll realize that due to technicalities, cases are being dropped. So writing is very essential for policing, very extremely essential. But
it becomes an official document, right?
Yep, absolutely. And this is your name. When you go to court, they're gonna go all over this. And once you lose credibility, that's it. You can't go back to court. That's one of the biggest things. But for training purposes, yeah, they tell you to work on this. They'll try to review it, but it really depends on the supervisor. If you have a good supervisor that A, knows how to write themselves or herself, B, has an vested interest, then they'll help you out. If not, it's going to be on you to be the best writer you can.
Would you say even prior to looking into law enforcement or applying to be in law enforcement, it's important that you really study grammar and punctuation for your career ladder journey and your upward mobility to advance?
I mean, it is my opinion that you should have a degree to get into policing, because you build the analytical skills that are needed. You build the proper writing skills. There's so many things that you get from a college degree that I think is essential, especially in policing. And we'll get into that conversation later on. But yeah, I think you should get the basics. And that's why writing should be a main focus in at least our high schools. If we're going to require a high school diploma to get into policing, then writing should be a main focus. But writing for law enforcement is completely different than writing in college. There's a huge, huge, huge difference. You write papers in college. They want it short, sweet, and to the point in policing, except when it comes to major crimes.
Got you. Okay. Next question. And I'm just going down the line reading some of these that people are submitting.
Quincy,
Let me see. Yep.
We have one in the waiting room.
Didn't even see. Okay, I'll get to that. Let's see. Man. Okay. Hopefully that'll pop up in a minute soon there. While we're working on that, John, I wanted to get into a question I have for you. What type of major challenges do you feel like law enforcement are having with policies and procedure type processes today? Just your thoughts on that, please.
Yeah, that's a really good question and first things first, if you're uncomfortable, talking about race in law enforcement, you're already in the wrong profession, because it is I would argue it's at the forefront of law enforcement in this country. So there's people that, they try to be politically correct, or they shy away from wanting to talk about race or mentioning skin color, but that's gonna come up time and time again, because as our country continues to try and improve policing, that's one of the main components of what we're trying to talk about. So one of the biggest hurdles for law enforcement, and I think we're finally getting towards there, is a police department needs to accurately reflect the community that it's policing. So if you have a Black community and you have a white police department policing them, that's not going to work out. You need to have, if it's an Asian community, you need to have an predominantly Asian police department. If you have a Black community, you need to make sure that those officers are predominantly Black, because they need to be representing the community that they're policing. So for certain municipalities, if they've been behind on this, if they haven't been practicing that, then they're suddenly in a position where they're going to have to start hiring people from a certain race that maybe they've been neglecting, or maybe you could argue systemic racism. Maybe they haven't been including these people as applicants and hiring them as police officers. And now, as political pressure and people starting to focus on these police departments, and they're asking the question, why are there so many white police officers in a predominantly Black neighborhood? Why is this police department as a whole inaccurately reflecting who they're policing? Mr. Martinez mentioned he can speak Spanish. If you're going into a Spanish community and none of those officers have Spanish language skills, how likely are those citizens gonna interact well with those police officers? There's already a language barrier. If there's a skin color barrier as well, those people don't want to be helped by you. And I can't say I blame them at all.
Yeah. That's easy escalation, right? Just because of the breakdown in communication. So yeah, I totally hear that.
As humans, we tend to classify each other based on looks or based on beliefs, and we just segregate each other, and we try to create small groups. That's what humans do. And as a police officer, you don't want to exacerbate that and make that worse by coming to the table with not the language skills that you need. I know MPD in DC, MPD is Metropolitan Police Department. That's the city police in DC. They do a very good job of ensuring that if you're assigned to Chinatown and you have the language skills necessary to speak Mandarin, or you can speak Korean, or you can speak any of the languages they need in that area, they'll give those officers a language stipend. So every month, those officers are proficient in the language, if they can pass the tests, the last time I spoke to the guys up there, I think it was like $50 a month per language that you speak. So it's not a lot, but if you want to get assigned to an area where you're practicing your language skills and you're proficient, that can help. But I think that's the biggest hurdle today, is getting police departments up to speed where they need to be. People think diversity means just hiring people of a certain skin color, but diversity means making sure that it includes whatever that skin color is, whatever that race or whatever that heritage is. So, in communities where you have, like I said, if you have a large Asian population and you only have Black and white officers, then that Asian population might feel, already timid to talk to police officers. But if they don't feel like they're represented, it's going to create that barrier. So I think that's the biggest issue right now, is making sure that we're accurately reflecting the areas that we're policing.
Okay, great, thank you. Mr. Martinez?
Just repeat the question one more time. So, Ms.
So
Campbell.
what are difficulties you're seeing as a police officer dealing with policies and procedures and things like that going on that's representing a challenge for you all as an organization?
So this is multifaceted, right? This is a complicated thing. Policing, everyone should know at this point, policing is extremely difficult, and it comes with a lot of challenges. There's a lot of challenges. So one, I can attest to what Mr. Lynch just said, reflecting the community. Your police department should be reflecting the community you serve. So my dissertation was on actually the community policing model in a predominantly Latino neighborhood. And one of the major things that I got through the interviews that I did with a lot of residents was, I want to make sure, one, I will feel more comfortable with the person that looks like me and can speak my language. That was literally the number one thing that came out of those interviews. Everyone said the same thing. If they look like me and they understand what I'm saying, then although I might have a negative reaction with officers, I'm going to trust you because, tú eres mi gente, you're my people. You know what I mean? They want to feel like they can trust you. So that one little dynamic is great. But I think when it comes to policies, it's policy and justice, right? You have these policies to ensure justice. But when it comes to juveniles, and I'm going to say this for Prince George's County, when it comes to juveniles, you could be a juvenile and you get away with almost everything. And that's the biggest hurdle. I love dealing with juveniles. They are a headache when it comes to paperwork. They are a headache because of the laws, but I love working with juveniles because I think that's where you got to get them. You got to get them young so they can understand what they did was wrong and try to mold them. Are they going to listen 9 out of 10 times? No. But I've had a case, not getting too much into it, but I've had a case where this juvenile, had a gun, assaulted somebody, took their stuff. And when we got to court, they said, well, because he's a juvenile, he doesn't know what he's doing, so we're going to let him go. Okay, cool. I told the judge, all right. So in a few weeks, when you see him back here, don't be surprised. And of course, a few weeks later, guess who got arrested? The same individual. And guess what he did? The same thing. And guess what happened in court? He still doesn't understand what he's doing. So we're going to let him go. So guess what he did a few weeks later? The same thing. So it's a repetitive thing. So we have to work on this juvenile delinquency issue, at least here in this, I'm going to say Prince George's County. We need to work on it. We need to be stricter because sometimes you have to be hard on these laws so that people understand. It doesn't have to be mass incarceration. There's different levels of, I guess, rehabilitation and incarceration, because it doesn't only have to be punitive. It has to be rehabilitative so that they understand what's going on. So if we get hard on these juveniles, then perhaps our crime levels can go down. But at the moment, most of our crime is coming from juveniles. So once we get stricter with them, I think we get somewhere. So our biggest challenge right now is juveniles and the policies with them. We can't even interview them anymore. Yeah, so that's where we're at. You're muted.
Great information. Ms. Campbell, could you tell me also the same question? Let me know the kinds of challenges that you're experiencing, when it comes to policies and procedures and things like that. What's a heavy impact to you in your career field?
Well, I have the luxury of not having to work directly with people. I work with products, and products don't talk back. They don't run from me. So I have a different vantage point from, some of your experiences. And so the challenges that we face is not being able to present a case to make it stick. We go through, we travel, we interview, but if we put a period in the wrong place, then that can be our whole case. So that definitely is a challenge. But I am fortunate enough to belong to an organization where we focus primarily on women in law enforcement, and we look at the challenges of women or the challenges that women face in law enforcement. So on a bigger scale, while I might not have the, the day-to-day challenges of juveniles or even adults, I do see and hear and somewhat experience some of the challenges of being a woman in a male dominated field, and being in a field that isn't always sensitive to childcare issues or sick parent issues, because women, we know, primarily are the caregivers. And if you're a single parent and you have a sick child, but you have to respond, there's a challenge, there's an obstacle there. So while I don't directly have a lot of the challenges of dealing with people, I do know as a woman in a male dominated field, there is a challenge just existing.
Great information. Thank you. I want to get into the next question. What can you tell me about a time when you had to confront someone and de-escalate a situation in policing? Mr. Lynch.
I recall specifically there was one time, and I'm sure Mr. Martinez would probably agree, anytime you're dealing with, it's not really like the movies. I've very rarely encountered, my worst situations were when there's large groups of people and there's a potentially volatile situation. And like the incidents that you see on the news, you're so tunnel visioned and you're so focused on those incidents that you might not be seeing the position clearly like you should. But those are the ones that can turn very badly very quickly. And unfortunately, those are usually the ones that we see on the news. So for me, and I didn't know when the call came out, and unfortunately as a cop, the first one there, you don't really know what the facts are. A lot of times, whoever calls the police department, we call them RP, reporting party, they can give the wildest story or the most inaccurate description. They could just say 10 people are getting shot in a club or 15 people have knives in a club. You have no idea what's going on. So you're only responding to those facts that are known to you. And a lot of times, unfortunately, after the fact, the incident is studied very detailed and they have a very detailed investigation. And a lot of times the officers only based on their decisions, what they knew at the time. So I ran up to the club, which at the time I didn't know what was going on. It was supposed to be a fight in progress, possible shots fired. I was the first on scene, but I knew there were officers right behind me, meaning that I could hear the cars coming around the side of the block, and they were coming down the street. And there's a feeling of adrenaline you get when you hear an officer screaming on the radio. It's just sends ice through your veins. It's one of the worst things you can hear in law enforcement, and you could run through a brick wall to get to that officer because that's your friend. And a lot of times you're going to cookouts with these people and you've been to their kids' baptisms, and you create such an incredible bond with these officers. So when you hear an officer screaming on the radio, it's terrible. Anyway, I got there first, and it turned out that the fight in progress was long over. The people were already outside of the club. The club did a good job of getting everybody out immediately, I guess, because they knew that we were going to come in there. But in that situation, I had to quickly, seeing with a huge group of people, everyone had their phones out already. I had the opportunity to say, hey, do I want to handle this like a bull in a china shop and just go completely off the wall and just start swinging at people and start screaming at people, waving my gun around? Or do I want to take a quick second, figure out what's going on? And I'm so glad I did that. I really think that would have been the crossroads in my career of losing my job and being on the 5 o'clock news, or figuring out what happened and determining the two guys that had already gotten in the fight were pulled over to the side already, and it wasn't as big of a deal as I thought it was. So for me, that was a scary situation. The one-on-one interactions where I've had to de-escalate are usually much less intense than that. This goes back to where I think one of the important roles of females in law enforcement. A lot of the females I've worked with have the ability to take a volatile guy who see somebody of my size and they say, I want to fight this guy. This guy might think he's tough. Look at his mustache. He definitely wants to fight me. And then you have a female officer who can come in, and a lot of times they're able to de-escalate the situation just by talking to him. I don't know if maybe that person reminds them of a family member, or that person reminds them of somebody close to them. But there have been many times where, in order to de-escalate a situation, if I have somebody available, I'll call a female officer over. If I know that they're on shift, I know that they're with me, I'll say, hey, can you swing by? And this guy that's running his mouth, and the guy that's got his chest out, and the guy that wants me to fight him, a lot of times that person can just go up and talk to him, and that female officer can de-escalate it. So I think that's an incredibly powerful tool for de-escalating. It might not be you, because there's certain times where you go up, and no matter how you're mentally, call it mental judo, how good you are at de-escalating and calming people down, there's going to be some people that are going to fight you. It's their mission to fight you. They're going to do it no matter what you say. You can do all but lay your gun on the ground and lay down on the ground, and they're still going to fight you. So that's one of the difficulties of law enforcement, is for people like me who don't want to hurt somebody, and they don't necessarily, I don't want to cause people harm. I want to heal. Those knowing that you're going to have to get into a fight in your career, that can be difficult for some people. So.
Okay. Understood. Mr. Martinez, the same question. How give me an opportunity, a chance when you had to de-escalate a situation, and how you handle it.
I mean, Mr. Lynch, let me tell you, what you just described is every weekend night shift at in Riverdale, every single weekend. I mean, we just had a huge fight it was Friday night. I'm talking about everyone was just fighting. We got a call, one of my officers just said, units, that's it. And we just heard his voice, because that's all he could get out. And once we heard his voice, when I tell you that adrenaline you were talking about, my car hit 130 miles per hour to get to wherever I had to go. I don't care. I mean, at that point, I'm getting to my guy. I don't know what's going on. So that situation was pretty bad. We had over 20 people just fighting everywhere. It was two different entrances. You got people in the front, you got people inside, you got people fighting on one corner. It was chaotic. But yes, having a level head and going into a situation, first and foremost, you're looking for your guy. You're looking for the officer who called out for help. You find them, and then you got to make sure he's good. 9 out of 10 times they know how to handle themselves, but still, I've had a situation where the officer got jumped. We had like 4 different people trying to attack them, and we had to obviously go a little hands-on and get the situation under control. But honestly, in law enforcement, 9 out of 10 times, tell people your number one tool as a law enforcement officer is verbal judo. If you know how to talk to people, it's going to come down. But I agree. There's some people that no matter what you do, they just want to fight, and you just got to be ready for it. But 9 out of 10 times, you can be able to talk to people, but you got to come with a different approach. And that's where that mentality of the bad cop, good cop kind of situation, where this guy's going, very aggressive, but then you got to be the calm one. Sometimes that's a tactic. Sometimes it's just used so that people can come down, because sometimes you have to talk to people a certain way so that they can relax. Like with juveniles, we'll go back to them. You cannot talk to a juvenile professionally. That does not exist. It will not work. And if someone who's never worked in law enforcement wants to come over and see how it really is, juveniles are disrespectful. So you got to talk to them a certain way and give them you got to be a little bit mouthy. You got to be mouthy with them, because they respect that more than someone that says, well, sir, please calm down. And no, it's stop. My man, calm down. And that's it. You got to be aggressive with them. So de-escalating a situation is knowing the situation you go into, or at least the dynamic of who's involved, and then going from there. How you handle a situation at a bar is completely different than how you're going to handle it with juveniles, which is completely different than you're going to handle it with, let's say, some older gentleman that's down the block that just got assaulted. You got to know who you're talking to in order to de-escalate a situation. And that's where police officers have to wear multiple hats. And I agree with Ms. Campbell. Social work is a very transferable skill, because as a cop, what are you not? You're a counselor, you're a social worker, you're a cop, you're a writer. I mean, you're a news reporter. What aren't you as a cop? So, and I also agree, if you have a female officer, which we have a female chief, but we don't have anyone on patrol, they're usually so good at just calming people down. And it's lovely. Because this guy could be screaming at you, and then the female comes in like, Papi, come on, calm down. And it's like,
Gotcha.
What? But yeah,
Gotcha. Okay. Ms. Campbell, I know you operate in a different situation, but if you have any input, or just anything you've witnessed, please let us know.
Well, actually, I did experience a challenge, and I had to use those very social work skills that my mother ensured that I get. I was overseas traveling, and we were interviewing some employees, and the head of the company was not of the same nationality of the employees who had been previously instructed not to talk to us. But the employees felt comfortable enough to speak to us and tell us that things weren't uh, things weren't operating the way they were being reported to us. And so what happens in foreign countries, larger companies or companies of other countries will buy an area of land in a country, and that becomes an extension of their country. So for an example, if a Chinese company buys an area of land in a Filipino country, that area of land becomes Chinese land, and they are subject to Chinese law. They're subject to Chinese rules of operation. Even though we're in the Philippines, the Filipino government or the Filipino law enforcement doesn't necessarily have any jurisdiction in this small section. And so in a workforce that is primarily Filipino, they don't have any rights, but they felt like us Americans coming in, they could now, let us know what they were experiencing. And the owner of the company became very irate. And in fact, they have their own security force in this area, which is not under the same jurisdictions and policies and practices of the outside country's law enforcement. And it became a little volatile. And so I'm not carrying a weapon in another country. And so I had to talk the situation down. I had to communicate to this owner who was of another nationality. Now, I'm a Black female. So some of the challenges of being a Black female in the field kicked up. And then with an Asian population, they don't always have the same regard for women in these positions. So I had to do a lot of verbal judo. I had to really talk the situation down, because I had to ensure the safety of my people enough for us to get out of the area. So, and these areas are usually encaged in these big gates. So my main objective was to get us outside these gates where the other law enforcement would be waiting for us. So yeah, that even though, some of the situations that you talk about, I don't experience it directly, but when you're in another country, you definitely have to use those skills to make sure that if you do get into a situation, you're able to get outside of that perimeter so that you can get the help that you need.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. We're gonna move on to our next question. I only have two more, and then we'll wrap it up and jump into another phase of the meeting. Could you tell me about, this is for Mr. Lynch, could you tell me about other sought after career fields in law enforcement that may be civilian related and not just police? Could you share a little insight on that? Just in your department, in the department in general, what other people are doing that are not police, and what those fields and titles are really.
So this is going to set you up to sound more amazing than people already know you are, but the role that you're currently in, physical security, the role that I'm currently in right now as a physical security specialist, everyone, when I was a police officer that met with you, that is where every uniformed officer I knew was trying to get into, because it removes you from the front lines of law enforcement, but they're very parallel in their objective. You're still securing areas. You're still, it's an extremely technical field. And you taught me a little bit when I was there, even though that wasn't my role yet. But being a physical security specialist, you're able to kind of go anywhere in the world and do that. As you mentioned, you have traveled all over the world being a physical security specialist. I was able to start my career as a physical security specialist down here. What does that entail? It's installing badge readers for secured access control systems, video management, video monitoring, facial recognition, things that can detect IEDs, improvised explosive devices, hardening the structure in bulletproof glass, bullet resistant glass. That's where the country's heading right now. I'm currently working for an extremely large energy company down in Florida, which if you're familiar with Florida, you could probably figure out which one that is. But with recent substation shootings and securing the critical infrastructure of the nation, that's where the future is going. And it's plain as day that physical security is going to be the new front line, because if you don't have to send a person out there, you can make that structure impregnable from the outside before even having to dispatch somebody. You've already won that battle. So I know a lot of police officers trying to get into physical security. I know a lot of police officers who are taking courses on their own and paying for their own courses to try to make themselves more competitive to get to that job. But since you, as a police officer, you badge in somewhere every day with a card reader, you are utilizing camera footage for reports and for investigations. It makes sense that a lot of these police officers can jump into that parallel career field and get involved in something that's so similar to what their day-to-day is. But if it's not that, I would also say being an investigator in terms of if you're going to try to be like a frontline supervisor, that can also be a career field where you're getting management experience. And then this is the most important one. Anytime you're dealing with a budget or you have control of a budget and you're exercising how that budget is spent, that is what companies want to see, because they're going to say, okay, he's got management experience. He or she's got leadership experience. They're a police officer. But if you've been in control of a budget, essentially that's what a police department is. It's a company. And they're going to say, we trust, the city of XYZ trusted this gentleman with funds, in excess of millions of dollars. We should also trust them with the funds because they've been proven responsible with that. So anything that's managing a budget, I would recommend, and then getting into physical security, just because of how good of a career field it is and how it's exponentially growing.
Yeah, it's thank you. It's a very diverse field. I've been in and out security for the last 23 years, either through physical security or technical assessments, countermeasures, doing other things with private investigators, and you can get into other things that are technically able to sustain you and still work in law enforcement. I just have a lot of different past experience, again, with the State Department, with Capitol Police, with, doing some stuff with the Pentagon and different things that allowed me to just really work in a law enforcement environment. Even when I was, in the Navy, I did a couple of deployments with SEAL Team 1 and everything that they needed in support of them, cameras, locks, listening devices, all those different kind of things that we can get into. But those are all very critical learning tools that can just escalate you through the roof, and then they're highly sought after. So thank you. I appreciate it. Mr. Martinez, the same question, please.
I mean, I'm gonna say for in general in law enforcement, there's many positions. So you have dispatchers, if you want to be an emergency dispatcher, communication specialist. We have data analyst positions that are civilian. We have forensic psychologists. We have forensic techs, crime scene investigators. There's many jobs out there that even in Baltimore now, a lot of positions that used to be sworn are now becoming non-sworn. So like there's assistant director of gun violence prevention in Baltimore right now. That's a civil position. They have a lot. They're trying to have at least one civilian, I think, in a lot of police departments in a leading role. So there are positions out there. I know one of the major things for my students at Howard is that they want to do, like, besides becoming a lawyer, is crime scene investigations. And that's a new major thing that that's becoming a civilian job. But the most common one would be communications, because if you can handle multiple lines of different emergencies, gathering the information, sending your officers out there, making sure you're sending the right officers out there because you have to know who's where. Because for us, we don't have certain geographical areas, but others they do. So in a major police department, you have to, but we do have a lot of jobs out there.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Ms. Campbell, same question. What type of sought after careers are also available within your department that people seek and, you know, that are also good jobs to have outside of policing?
Well, I work for the federal agency, law enforcement agency that has the largest amount of employees. And so there are so many different types of law enforcement opportunities available. But what I noticed as of late that is becoming much more needed, I don't know that people are seeking it out, is a resiliency person, a person who helps deal with those officers or those first responders or law enforcement officers who are stressed on the job, those who are having challenges with substance abuse or mental health issues, and elevating those positions to the point that ensures policy makes sure that people use it. So, you know, you may have someone in distress who, I'm not going to go seek help because everybody's going to laugh at me, but then you'll turn around and go and respond to a situation and you might not make the best decisions. So a sought after position, in my opinion, should be one that ensures resiliency of the workforce. And our agencies, federal government is spending a lot of money in resiliency support. I myself just recently became a chaplain. And so not only are they providing like those programs, but they're also bringing in other means of supporting and other ways of supporting. So you might not go to employee assistance, but you may talk to a chaplain or you may talk to a peer support person. So those positions, in my opinion, are more sought out. Ultimately, for me, I definitely want to do more global work. So being able to elevate my overseas presence to a more permanent situation, that is a sought after position for myself. And then also, I also look at transferable experiences. I'm also able to take my law enforcement knowledge into my church. And I'm the director of the security ministry at my church. So while I may not be able to do some kind of hands-on law enforcement work similar to what you're doing on the call, I am using some of those same kinds of skills and tactics in dealing with people in a church environment. And I have some stories, and there's definitely some stories to be told about law enforcement within the church community. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. I know that some of the larger churches also, you know, get into threat assessments and things of that nature. So it's a very important component. And a lot of these things you can be contracted out to do independently if you have the skill and the technical background. So, you know, we talk about additional funding, you know, and things that you can do to that allow you to employ others and, you know, keep yourself employed, you know, that's very important. I have one last question before I turn it over to Mr. Martinez to wrap it up. What I wanted to ask everyone was, what do you know now that you didn't know when you first started that you would tell yourself? You know, in order to put yourself in a better position. Mr. Lynch.
I don't want to give the wrong message when you're applying for a police department, but to Mr. Martinez's earlier point, we're hurting out here. Most of the people that would be tremendous police officers don't want to be cops. I know people that they train MMA, they're intelligent, they can write well. We could teach them how to shoot a weapon and be firearm proficient, and they would probably be great on the street interacting with their community. They just don't want to be cops. Unfortunately, a lot of people that do want to answer the call and be police officers, they're not qualified. They're not intelligent enough. They wouldn't make good decisions, but they have the desire to want to do that. The still police departments can't accept them. What you're left with is a very small percent of the population that would be a good police officer, but also wants to be a police officer. So when you make it through that, you start doing that application process, when you get to the interview, I always tell people they want you so badly. And they're not going to just take anybody that's not qualified. But if you're making it to the interview process and you're speaking on an oral board and you have the very intimidating multiple police officers kind of grilling you and interrogating you to see how well you handle that pressure, just know that they want you there. They want you there very badly. And they're almost secretly rooting for you. So if I had known that when I went through these interviews when I was younger, probably would have handled them with a little bit more confidence, because like I said, they're really hoping that it works out for them, because they've said that this person's qualified, this person wants to do it, and they're actually excited to start mentoring you and guiding you on that journey of being a police officer. So go in there with your head held high, know that you're worth it and that you can be a great asset to that police department. But I wish I would have told myself that when I was 21 years old, but you know, that I can pass that on now.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great advice. We're definitely trying to put everyone in a position to relay that information. You know, every time we talk to somebody at Functional Training Zone, we want to share our career experience background, right? So I want to talk to myself 20, 25 years ago to tell me what to do and what not to do. That's all very critical details. To you trying to achieve your goals where you want to be. Thank you. We really appreciate that input. Mr. Martinez, same question. What advice would you give yourself, 20 years ago? And what do you know now that you didn't know back then?
I mean, I have to agree with Jonathan over here. It's everyone. So when you get to that oral board, everyone wants you to pass. Everyone, you don't understand that they have to have that face, that grill, because obviously they got to show you, that business, but they're really rooting for you. And honestly, it's gotten to a point where they'll ask a question, and if you're stumped, they'll just reword it a little bit. They try to be like, well, you said this before, so we'll elaborate on that. It's to the point where I just wish, just be yourself. I tell everybody, be yourself. No one wants a robot. No one needs a robot in policing. They want you to show who you are in this interview. So don't be nervous. Don't overthink it, and just go in there with who you are. And I tell everybody, my chief knows it, deputy chief, everyone knows it. This is me. This is Martinez. I don't care what color shirt you have on, how many stripes you have, what your position is. This is who I am. Accept me for who I am, because that's how it is. We have to be behind this badge and gun and everything is a human being, is a character. It's an individual who has the power to do so many things. I want to make sure that that character fits the mold of my police department. So just be yourself and you'll be fine.
Thank you for your input, sir. I appreciate that. Ms. Campbell, same question, please.
Thank you. Well, the first thing I would tell myself is that you can do it. As a woman, you're told, you have to be a Susie Homemaker, or, you have to just go to those female positions. And so just give the girls or young women the confidence that they can get into this field and excel at it. I'd tell myself to make sure that I have interests outside of the profession. A lot of times you become this persona, as we've been talking about, and you don't know how to turn it off. So you're out there, fighting crime, and then you're coming home and fighting crime in your house. And sometimes your kid just needs a hug. They don't need, that person or that persona that you have to be when you're on the street. And also to just develop a routine, like a wellness routine, because it's a highly stressful job. It requires a lot of you. You have to make a lot of decisions, and there's a lot of pressure. But if we don't take care of ourselves, then one, who's going to, but two, it will affect our decision making. I know, and I apologize for having technical difficulties earlier, but a part of our abilities to do this job is also our abilities to be able to problem solve for ourselves. You know, we are called to solve problems for other people, but sometimes that grace isn't given to ourselves. And so that's where I, you know, really believe that if I take that time, or I understand that I need to take the time out for myself and just decompress, I think that I would be better off in doing the job now.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. I
Oh, one
appreciate
more
it.
thing. One more thing.
Yep.
Also be mindful of the imprint that my social media and my outside activities have. A lot of times, you know, we're posting maybe us being in a bar or a situation that isn't very becoming. People, one, it doesn't leave, and two, people pay attention to those types of things, and that definitely affects your relationship building with the community. How can you tell me not to do it, and I saw you, you know, last week on Facebook doing such and such, or Instagram or TikTok?
Or last year, right?
Mhm.
That it never dies, it never goes away. Those things stick with you for a long time, even if you're grown out of that phase and you're no longer that person, right? That people will hold you to what they see. And it's, you know, social media and the internet's not going anywhere, and it's everywhere. So yeah, I totally understand of that portion of what you're saying. I remember working at the embassy and knowing that you know, in the visa office, they would at minimum they would go and just see who's on Facebook or social media, whatever, what they can find on them on the internet prior to granting them any kind of visas to come to the United States. And, you know, at a minimal, you know, you needed to have that clean. I was hoping to get our one of our teammates on here, Kia Blackstone, that's works in personnel security. But yeah, cause she was able to talk about all of that stuff in social media, you know, and being sure you have a good name because it follows you everywhere. So, and I think a lot of people are in the now, really don't think about themselves 10 years from now, what they're doing, but it's extremely important. You know, it's kind of like a credit score, like, you know, and it doesn't go anywhere. You know, it can get better, but, you know, if somebody wants to go back into the archives, they can really see all the bad things that you've done, right? So be cognizant of that in the way you move and where you want to be. So thank you. I appreciate that input. I wanted to close out my portion of it before I turned over to Mr. Martinez. We wanted to get into the events recently from Memphis with Mr. Nichols, the passing of Mr. Nichols, and those events, and get everyone's input on it. We felt like we wanted to take this opportunity while we're talking about law enforcement to also just do a real good check on ourselves and, you know, our mind states and where people are day to day, because the human factor really contributes to all of this, and people have to be accountable. So how can we do better with keeping people accountable in all our positions, right? We all have an authority figure that we have to comply by. So, you know, no one's above that, even at home, right? No one's above that. So, you know, we wanted to jump into that conversation, and I appreciate all you guys' input. Felix?
Alrighty, so as law enforcement professionals, we know that policing and just law enforcement, no matter what the position is under attack, and rightfully so. We see the actions of a lot of officers that I think, and this is just my opinion, and again, this is my opinion and not my department's or anything. These are my own opinions. We we lose track of why we why we joined, and we lose track of, you know, what's reality, what's not. If I have a gun and badge, that does not make me any better than any other individual. It gives me a responsibility. If anything, I'm supposed to be held to a higher standard, meaning you're supposed to know, to the points we were making earlier, we're supposed to know how to solve a problem, not create the problem. And the actions we saw from Memphis is a complete uh, it's honestly an embarrassment. It is not why we choose to serve. It is not why, that's not what we do in our profession. We are here to protect and serve. We're public servants, and we are here to ensure that the public is receiving a service for their betterment, not for what just occurred. When we see this video, I don't know if we've all seen the video, but there's a lot to unfold. When you look at it, protocols were definitely not followed. It's 5-on-1. There's no reason why we can't handcuff a guy with 5-on-1. There's no reason. And they're 5 strong males. Structure-wise, that 5 individuals is no excuse. We're taught in the academy how to, 1, de-escalate a situation, 2, how to approach a traffic stop, 3, how to control a scene. There's no way that this escalates to this point. And then what happened to the duty to intervene? We just went through George Floyd in 2020 that changed the landscape of policing completely. And now it's 2023, and now we're talking about Memphis. And now we're talking about police brutality at the forefront again. So I guess I want to start the conversation off with just that little overview and just get your inputs on what you guys saw or of the situation.
John, could you lead the conversation, please?
Yeah, sure. I think we're starting to see the line shift, and I don't think this is a good thing at all, but it used to be white officers versus Black community members, and that was where the whole police brutality for the last, I would argue, 30 years has been switched around. Now you're just seeing police versus public, which I think is more damning to our career, because as hard as Officer Martinez works, as hard as Officer Lynch has worked in our communities to try and make the police officer, the public trust us. And that's also when dealing with crime too. You can't, there's drug dealers out there, there's people that were bad people. You're not trying to build a good relationship with them, because at the end of the day, you're there to put those people away. But you're still trying to repair and heal that negative image in the community. And then something like this happens, and then everybody shutters the doors, and all those people that you were out talking to the week before and building those relationships with completely stop talking to you. And you can't blame those people, because everyone in the community feels the same way. So you talk about wanting to unite a community, you want to unite people, you do an act of violence like that, and then see how quickly that community comes together. Unfortunately, it's against the police, and it's a community interaction that you don't want to have, but that's the quickest way to turn an entire community against you, is to do something like that. Real quick, I have a really interesting training scenario that we do at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. You're driving around in your vehicles, and you have they have a whole city built there at FLETC because they have the money to do it. But you get called to an officer needs assistance, and you drive in, and then you're viewing how these officers handle it. The officers, the only thing that the call goes out is officer needs assistance. You go in there, and the officer is fighting with somebody, and as they're hitting them with the baton, the person's fighting back. As soon as you get into the room, the person goes limp. They stop moving. The officer still keeps hitting them. It's very difficult to mentally, and I'm not at all defending the actions, I'm just telling you what the thought process is there. And that, as Officer Martinez said, the duty to intervene, you have to switch your process going from that officer is fighting with that person and needs help to, after a couple of swings, your brain, you say, wait, partner, he's good. And you're supposed to be pulling that person back. Hey, partner, he's good. Let's cuff him up. Partner, you're hitting the guy in the head and he's not moving at all. That's where that click from the humanity side, from robot police officer that we were talking about earlier, to not seeing the world in black and white, meaning there are gray areas where you can have somebody de-escalation of force, where you're required to go hands-on, you're required to use force. And then as that interaction is happening, you're going to have to scale back. Like you said, why can't we cuff that person? Why can't we stop having 5 people hit that person? Use of force, there's all these discussions about it. But in that training scenario, it was very interesting to see how some officers weren't able to switch that on. One of the officers, I remember, he actually pulled out his weapon and like covered the guy as he was continuing to beat the motionless person. Obviously that's corrected in the training academy. You want that to happen there and not out in the street. Some of the officers were pulling their batons out and joining, but I was very proud of the officers who wait a minute, partner, and they were pulling him back. Partner, he's not moving. Partner, you good? He's good. We got him. and then they would cuff them up and they would push them out of the way. So I think as we continue to improve what the training requires for police officers, and we talk about increased professionalism, Mr. Martinez mentioned that you should have a law enforcement degree to enter law enforcement, to truly understand what every asset of what we're doing and the facets of law enforcement. I'm hoping that these situations go down, but every time I've said that, 2 years later, another thing like this happens. So unfortunately, when you ask a community, when they say, what can we do to make this better? I always say the same thing. Send us your best and your brightest. Send us the best people you have in your community so that they can police this community. You know what I mean? I don't need people to investigate this. I don't need people to tell us what we did wrong. I need those good people wearing a uniform, because when those good people are wearing a uniform, these types of things don't happen.
Got you. Ms. Campbell?
I struggle with this because, one, I intentionally have not watched the video because as a mom, I can't imagine raising a child and seeing that anything like that happen to them, and then understanding that when people have their back up against the wall and things are happening to them and they feel powerless, the first thing they do is call for their mom. We're supposed to be the saviors and the protectors of our children, and we never send them out to be in these kinds of positions. So for that very reason, I wasn't able to watch it, but I have looked at commentary, and I have listened to other officers talk, and I monitor social media very heavily. And I hear, there's only bad apples, the bad apples, but the whole orchid is tainted now. These situations taint the whole orchid, and you can't see. Every apple looks rotten now. Even the yellow apples look rotten, and the green apples look rotten, and the red apples are rotten. And then if you see a brown apple, it's like, oh my gosh. So, we have to systematically, and what you said, as a community, come together and problem solve with law enforcement to address these atrocities. But it's hard when it keeps happening. We have these task force, we have these platforms where we're talking about it and talking about our feelings with the hope that someone will listen, and then it happens again. And to know that these were African American officers, to see the response to them being fired so swiftly, and the handling of them, I'm proud. I am proud that it was a female chief that made the decisions to, and in fact I know her, to make those decisions very swiftly. I'm encouraged that her model will kind of be the model that people will draw from in dealing with these situations, which unfortunately I believe will happen again. Like I believe that in a few months we will be in this place again, but I'm encouraged that this chief was able to provide a blueprint to help us address it. So, and just another thing, in terms of looking at the far-reaching effects of these officers' actions, a lot of them belong to fraternities and Black fraternities, and it's becoming an indictment on this particular fraternity's actions. They did not think about their brothers in their fraternity. They didn't think about their brothers or sisters within their law enforcement community. And I'm really bothered by that. Like, who raised that? Who okayed that? Who sanctioned those actions? And I'd really want to have a conversation with them. I think that's my mom hat kicking in. So again, I really don't know that I answered the question because I'm just racked with so much emotional feelings that I'm able to pull myself out of the law enforcement capacity and look at this from a different perspective. So I just need us to do better. I really need us to do better, no matter what color, no matter what interest, no matter what racial preferences, religious preferences. I just really need us to do better.
I
Thank you.
definitely answer the question. I mean, it's important to know you made something, you made mention. The policing subculture is something that we all have known that is an issue within society. I mean, I'm not just going to say policing, it's just society. The policing subculture, because you have the old way of policing versus the new way of policing, the old mentality to the new mentality. Because before it was hands on, let's just put it that way. We're not going to sugarcoat this. Now it's more of, it's 21st century policing. It's knowing that community policing is the way to go. It's the way to build trust, legitimacy for the police department. And honestly, in this situation, it goes back to the academy. It is a training situation, but it's also a mindset. So people got to understand that once you leave the training academy, you have to go through FTO, so which is a field training officer realm of it. So depending on where you go, it could be anywhere between a few weeks to a few months of FTO. You need to have the proper people in play as field training officers. You need to make sure that the person that is training your new cadets, your new officers, are top notch, top of the line, and that we're compensating them for that too. There has to be some type of compensation, because then we're going to be stuck with a puddle as opposed to a pool. You feel me? So one of the biggest things is to understand the dynamic of how important field training officers are and how important the culture within that department is. So it starts from the top. You have to have a proper leader that's going to ensure that when things like this happen, accountability is swift. It is swift. So I think it's we have to go back to training, making sure that we're training officers, de-escalation skills. And when I say training, and I'm gonna say it from experience, a day is not enough. A day or a few hours of community policing is not enough. But 3 weeks of driving a vehicle, I don't understand how we have 3 weeks of driving a cruiser is important, but we only have a few hours of how to de-escalate a situation. That's not every police department, but that's the experience that I had. There's a lot that has to change. So let's start off, let's get our community leaders, let's go to these police academies. Let's see what your act, don't give me what's on paper. I need someone inside. I need to see what's actually happening, because I could give you a piece of paper that shows you what's going on, but half the time it's not what's actually happening. And I can attest to that. I faced racism within the police academy. I faced it myself. And I'm still here as a cop trying to change that mentality. That's one of the reasons why I went back to school and got my doctorates, because I want to really bring that up, try to challenge that. But yes, this is a training issue and also a mindset issue. We are guardians. You can have a warrior mentality when it comes to being fierce, in a sense of having no fear to a situation when you defend the public. But we're guardians. We're trying to make sure we're serving the public. So.
Gotcha. Thank you, man. Thank you. I had some input and thoughts for a few people that emailed us and wanted to get you guys' intake on that and just like suggestions and different things like that. One of them I personally had was, John talked about FLETC, right? And going through FLETC as a federal law enforcement, right? But for some reason we can't create a uniform training platform that would allow all officers to go through, similar like FLETC, right? Just as a baseline. So you're totally accountable for what you've learned at a minimum level, right? On the federal side of law enforcement, right? And then go back to your municipalities or whatever and gain additional training from there. We wonder why that doesn't exist, right? That type of uniform training platform, just like boot camp, right? For the military, like, hey, no matter where you get stationed or assigned, you will go to this boot camp. You, at minimum, you will learn this. At minimum, you will be trained on this, right? And for some reason, that just doesn't exist. And I don't think it's a budget issue, right? We just need, legislation to pass to to have action behind it, because I think that's truly important. But I'm gonna get into a few of the questions that people had that I wrote down earlier, right? One of them said that the Scorpion Squad, right? Which I agree on this, right? You name something Scorpion Squad that truly sounds offensive, right? That doesn't sound like in the defense of the or support of the community. That sounds like you're going out and being offensive. And you know, you name something that's community funded or county funded, right? And you name it Scorpion Squad, right? To me, that is disaster from the initiation of it, you know, because we don't want to, as police officers, we don't want to give the impression that we're out on the offense and being predatory to people, right? We're there in support of you for what you need. So I like to get you guys' input on that and your thoughts.
So I guess I could start. Yes, you're 100% correct. There is no reason why we have a task force that's called Scorpion. Even if you look around the country now, they're not creating SWAT teams. They're crisis intervention teams. They're tactical response teams. Scorpion, what is the purpose of Scorpion? Someone explain that to me. Someone. I mean, when you think of a Scorpion, I'm thinking the thing's gonna hurt me. So that's the same thing the community's gonna see. Like, what is the purpose of that? Optics is everything. Optics is the number one thing when it comes to law enforcement, when it comes to any type of profession. So if from the very optic of your being is wrong, it is harsh, what do you expect? Do you expect the community to trust you? No. So I think that's something, again, I'm pretty sure this task force was created some time ago. So it goes from old mentality to new mentality, but it's something that the chief, unfortunately, she's going to have to rectify. Oh, well, she has rectified, she disbanded it. But moving forward, she's going to be the leader here saying, we're not going to have a task force like this, because now I would love to know more information as to what did the Scorpion Task Force do? What was their job?
Why were they created? You know, so yeah, definitely. John?
Yeah, I mean, I won't beat a dead horse, but it's my opinions echo what you guys are saying. It's the object of these programs. And the other thing that makes the community so angry is these are all budgeted from taxpayer dollars. So when you look at what police spend, and I understand why I've always been a proponent of making sure police officers are well equipped. And a lot of times that brings up issues in and of itself. Like, why do they need these vehicles? Why do they need this? Why do they need body armor? Why do they need these uniforms? But if you're deliberately creating something that looks as aggressive and, as you said, predatory, then of course they don't want to pay for that, but they're unfortunately not being asked. Nobody said, hey, we're going to create Scorpion Squad. Are you guys cool with that? Because they all would have said no. And they also probably would have said, what's the purpose of this? And how can we opt out of this? Because we don't want this. It doesn't sound helpful. Scorpions aren't helpful. Scorpions don't distinguish between friend and foe. It's not something that a community will say, well, maybe the Scorpions will only get the bad people. It sounds like a liability and something dangerous that you don't want in your neighborhood. So I'm agreeing with what you guys are saying.
Thank you. Ms. Campbell?
I mean, yeah, to just piggyback on what's been said, you are what you eat. So if you're being fed that you are supposed to be a Scorpion, you're going to personify that. So they pretty much got their marching orders just by the way they were named to determine their approach to the community. And again, like what was said, we have to rethink how we are going to be effective in dealing with the community. The way that they've done it before in the past is when it doesn't apply anymore. And so it's going to be training, it's going to be education, but it's also going to be preparing people to get to a point to be able to receive these jobs. We do want the community or the police force to be representative of the community. But if the school districts aren't producing, members of the community who are even able to pass the first level of interviews, we're still going to be in that cycle. So yes, we do have to look at the training. We have to look at the way we name our initiatives, but we also have to work with the school districts and other entities that are responsible for feeding, the candidates to these positions. And if you have a sick school system, they're going to produce sick people, and those sick people will, be the ones applying for these jobs. And so it's like a never-ending circle. So we have to take a larger scale approach to addressing this issue, other than, it's a training thing. We have to look at, and it's been said too already, the education of the people who would be viable candidates. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I was just reminding of something, and I'm speaking for more of a military frame of mind, right? But accountability is everything, right? I've had the opportunity to work with different branches, services, go to war, be overseas, be in these hostile fire situations, and military follows the UCMJ, right? And also the Geneva Convention, right? But that doesn't seem to exist at home, right? When it comes to different things, far as being accountable and just respect for just another combative, right? And the community and things of that nature, right? That stuff is extremely important, but it doesn't seem to replicate here in our own backyard. When a special forces unit is in the Kandahar or wherever they are, and they have to call back to the commanding officer has to call back to a ship in Hawaii has to call back San Diego has to call back to the Pentagon. Like, all of those accountabilities in place. And I know this because I've set up a lot of those radio comm systems, right? And all of that accountability is there, but yet in our backyard there's a instant where someone can react, right? And again, the accountability is not there in place for people to be held more accountable for their actions, and abuse of authority is happening everywhere. Years ago when I was in overseas, Abu Ghraib was a big thing that was going on. Some of those people, military, that were involved in that and involved in what that happened at that pension are still in Leavenworth, right? And and they are depicted as a certain way, right? But again, these people were held accountable, transferred, and that's where they are, right? So at what level could we start trying to expedite efforts to get the same accountability in place for law enforcement professionals and people who are here in our own backyard is extremely important and needs to exist on some kind of way. I've had two more inputs and then we'll wrap it up from some people that were on our YouTube page. One lady said, maybe we should have QR codes on our license plates, so when an officer scans the QR codes, all the registered owners will be notified of the time and location. All right, I think something like that would have been important in this case, definitely for his own parents to know where he was, what time incidents happened, and I don't think that's a difficult fix at all. Since we definitely have the tools and the resources in place, definitely, I would definitely be into that. Just, scanning the vehicle and knowing what time and location where the vehicle is and when this incident is taking place. That's a great one to me. Any inputs on that?
These officers had body cams, that's dashboard cams, there were aerial surveillance, and that wasn't a deterrent. I mean, definitely I applaud, the community. Like, we're so desperate, we're like, we got to try everything. We have to try anything. And I applaud that person for having a suggestion, but people spend a lot of money for these things and they weren't a deterrent. It's like, it's not a one size fit all kind of approach. It has to be a policy driven. It has to be a trickle down effect. And it also has to be an inner accountability issue. They had all these things and they still broke the law, so that's a problem within yourself. Like that. So again, I wrote it down because I was like, oh, that might be a good idea. But then I thought, wow, they had a dash cam. I mean, and thank God they had it, and they had the body on cam so that we could see what was going on, but it wasn't a deterrent. So
Yeah. I think that this approach would be more geared towards the end user, which will be the registered person, more than waiting for information and video footage to come out. Just like we get all kinds of notifications on our phone. Hey, like my son is here being pulled over, like I'm going there, right? Something is wrong, I'm going there. So, it may be approach, it may be something to look into. I'm not for sure, but that was just someone's opinion, and we want to respect everyone's opinion and thank them. John, your thoughts?
Yeah, I definitely applaud people for, unfortunately, there's so much finger pointing when something like this happens. People just start blaming each other. So I definitely applaud you if you can put on your thinking cap and just start creating any type of solution or propose any type of idea. I agree, Ms. Campbell, that I think we could try to put as many barriers in place as possible, but like you're addressing some of the symptoms. We need to address the cause. We need to make sure that this incident doesn't happen. We need to make sure it doesn't happen because the police officers don't want it to happen, not because the police officers are afraid that the QR code went off and that somebody has been alerted and that they're now being more closely monitored. This is something that has to happen, you said, at a very high level, not just a policy change, but this will be some sort of political movement. Unfortunately, with political divides, it's often hard for people to agree on which side needs to make the changes, and there's always finger pointing. But I think once we, like I mentioned before, once we can start
are going to fund the changes.
Yeah, exactly. That's the other thing, is who pays for the QR codes? Who's going to monitor it? Who's going to set these up? Is that coming out of our budget? I think once we can just start getting quality police officers in these positions, we always talk about increasing police officer pay to make it more attractive. Unfortunately, I think you have to have those police officers in place before you can justify that pay. I know that's a similar issue where they talk about with teachers too. Once you start getting these police officers to be of the highest caliber and to represent the best people in the community, then I think you can turn around and say, hey, instead of starting us off at 45, 50, 60,000, these officers like Mr. Martinez are very, very well educated. They're very professional. These people should be starting off at 90, 100,000. And then we quickly be able, at the school level, we can make this attractive for people. So instead of saying like, hey, this guy didn't have any else thing going for him, he's just going to be a cop. He looks like he could fight somebody. He could just become a cop if all else fails. Instead, we have people desiring to do that. Like when I grow up, I think I'm going to make some good money. I'm going to get my degree and I'm going to become a police officer. They're like, oh, that's pretty hard to get into. Like, no, I can do it if I put my mind to it. Make that as attractive as some of these other careers, and make sure that every community, black, white, is sending the best representation they have to fill those spots. We won't have to worry about QR codes or body cams, because those police officers are going to be your children and how you raise them, sending them out with the same morals and the same core values that we have.
Change the culture. Definitely change the culture, Yeah, that's great. Felix, did you have any input?
They nailed it. They said every single point I was gonna say. It's the truth. We know what needs to change. Now it's time for our leaders to say enough is enough. It's time to change it. I will say the one thing about the QR code and the registered owner knowing what's going on depends if the registered owner, it could be a stolen vehicle, or let's say it is the parent that's the registered owner. It can create, depending on the officer, a situation further, because you can't just pull up to a traffic stop when a traffic stop's happening, because now you're intervening in an investigation, and that can lead to some situation. Because I have had this happen where you got OnStar, you click a button and it notifies somebody you're getting pulled over, and I have had the parent come in the child was only getting pulled over because they had a broken tail light, and they were just getting a warning and talking. But then the parent came in and became belligerent. The child got a warning, the parent got locked up because they got physical. So it's just things that we have to consider. It's a case by case basis. We could further. I applaud the suggestion. Let's just look at that situation. You know, that suggestion and take it a step further and really talk about it, right? But the number one thing is mentality, training, and trying to get to the root cause of something. Because again, the cameras were on. The officer foolishly thought that he shut off the camera when he started speaking, but they all had their cameras on while they were talking about how they pummeled this individual.
Yeah,
It
don't make sense.
doesn't make sense. So yes, we have that. Let's just figure out how we could implement this, but at the same time, it comes back to the individual.
Got you. And our last one was placing making SOPs and processes public viewing. So the community has the ability to understand processes and procedures of what's supposed to happen. I'm guessing if something happens outside of that, outside of the norm, then to increase their situational awareness. I think a lot of times when people are in those situations or getting pulled over, they're not necessarily aware of what's supposed to be happening, right? And because at the same time, when someone is following steps and procedures, if I ran a light, I ran a light. I know you're supposed to give me a ticket, and I know what I'm supposed to have on my person in the vehicle, and I get the ticket, and that should be the end of it, right? But when the situation escalates from there, and I have a full understanding of what the processes and procedures and SOPs supposed to be, then that increases my situational awareness for the event. Any thoughts?
Yeah, just I always encourage people, like, don't wait for there to be some sort of program to tell you this. Like, as a citizen, know what you're supposed to be doing. And then this is the most important thing. And this is very confusing to some people, but resisting an unlawful arrest is still unlawful, meaning that if you know that you're getting arrested and you shouldn't be getting arrested, and you know that there's possibly a racial component, unfortunately, when you're getting beaten or when you're getting executed by a police officer, that's an entirely different situation. But I'm talking about when you're being issued a ticket, when you're being physically arrested by somebody and you know that there's no grounds and it's completely unlawful, fighting back is unlawful. So what you need to do, and what we're seeing more people doing, is, okay, they take the licks, they go there, they sue the department. And all those officers get fired. They contact the lawyer, they document what happened, and that can never happen to those officers again, because those officers are removed and that police department loses a huge chunk of money. And that's ultimately what motivates both political parties. You look at the right and you look at the left, when they start losing money, that's when they start getting forced to make changes. So I think that those programs would be helpful, but I encourage everyone to already know what their rights are when they're going out. They shouldn't be confused. A police officer who can barely string a report together shouldn't be able to convince you that what you've done is illegal. When a quick cursory search of what your rights are and your First Amendment, we see First Amendment audits pretty frequently now. They've even visited the Mint in Philly. I don't know if you've seen that video, but First Amendment auditors, they go out and they bait police officers into reacting violently or to saying things that aren't true, making up laws. Then they can oftentimes sue that police department, and that can fund additional investigations by First Amendment auditors. So I think the shift is changing, where people are now becoming more and more aware of what they need to do and what their rights are. But I encourage that person's suggestion to make that more public. So if you don't have access to reading material and you don't have access to find out what your rights are, I think public courses and telling people, and this is unfortunate that we're even discussing this, but how to be stopped by a police officer, and how to document things after the fact. But you cannot hold court on the side of the street. And I tell people that all the time. If that officer is wrong, I'm hoping that we get to a point where the other officers will be able to stop that officer. But if they're not, you're going to unfortunately have to go along with it. And then after that is when you can get your, I don't want to say get your revenge, but where you can rectify and right that wrong. And that's usually going to be punitive against the police department, which is, in my experience, the biggest way to indicate change and to force change is by taking a huge chunk of that police department's salary for next year.
Awesome. Felix?
I agree. people, number one, and I think Mr. Lynch is speaking about educating yourself. That does not mean TikTok. Please and thank you. You have to actually educate yourself with what is out there in the law. A lot of people don't understand. One of the biggest things that is out there, like here in Maryland, the smell of marijuana does not allow you to check the individual, but it does allow you to check the vehicle. We got a lot of people that get combative when it comes to that. It is important for you to know this because, again, if you know you're smoking, you should know your rights, right? Know your rights the legal way, not TikTok. TikTok is going to mislead you, and fight your battle in court. That's why there's a system in place. A lot of people get this, they're afraid that, well, they're not going to release the video footage. The moment I turn on my camera, I thought I was going to have it here, but the moment I turn on my camera, that's it. It is recording, and I have no way to edit it. So always, that's one thing you should be looking at. If you're getting pulled over in a traffic stop, make sure that that camera's on. And you'll know it's on because after a few seconds, you'll hear a beep, beep, you know the camera's on, or you'll see a light on the camera. So making sure that they have the camera on, because that camera is your best friend at the same time as the officer's best friend. It's actually helped me from a complaint. So someone lied about what I did. So it is important for you to know your rights, fight it in court, and just go from there. Don't complicate something you don't have to complicate, and don't wait for a bad situation. You should already educate yourself, which goes back to the education component. Why isn't there these classes in high school? We've always spoken about, well, these kids should know their rights. Then why don't you teach them? A lot of kids don't want to go to a traditional college. So it shouldn't be on colleges. It shouldn't have to get to the university level. We should be having criminal law class courses taught in high schools. It should be a requirement alongside financial literacy and a few other things, because we have to change the dynamic of what education is in America. It's not where we should be.
Sounds like an FTZ class to me. Hey, you just mentioned something. The cameras, the body cameras that law enforcement professionals wear, those have to be turned on, right?
Yes. Anytime you're interacting with the public,
you physically have to turn it on, right?
yes. And then now there is a new version where the moment you pull out your baton, your pepper spray, or your gun, it will automatically turn your body camera on and any other officer that's within 50 feet.
Okay, because I was about to say that we operate different in security. We're there with technology to make it automatically come on when you hop out your vehicle. So the technology is there, right? So possibly using it in a analog or antiquated way, that needs to change as well, because technology is definitely, with some of the things that we have going on in security, technology is definitely there to have that video automatically come on or start recording as soon as you remove yourself from the vehicle. So, that's great to hear that component is working. Now, everyone may not have the funding for that particular upgrade or firmware or whatever it is, but we definitely need to get to a point where you don't have to turn it on anymore, right? It's already synchronized with either you, your vehicle, or the devices on you. So yeah, I mean, thank you.
If we have money to send to other countries, we have money.
Obviously. Ms. Campbell, we're gonna wrap it up with you and your input.
Well, definitely all of what you said is great, but we, have to get to a point where we get the community back on our side. And how we do that is tapping into a lot of these social fraternal organizations that are in existence that, have a vested interest in improving community relations. I am very active in an organization where we are totally committed, women of law enforcement who are totally committed in changing the narrative of our experiences with the community. And we do it in our small way by, maybe throwing a tea party for girls or giving them different experiences that they might not have. Great opportunities to also use other resources that don't require money.
social media, I didn't want to reference TikTok, but I'm a firm believer in TikTok because if it's used in the right way, it will reach the audience that, like Mr. Martinez, what you talked about earlier, we're not going to get a teenager to pull out the constitutional rights or the Bill of Rights, but you package it correctly in a TikTok, it'll get their attention. It'll start the conversations. So we're at a point.
We have to adjust to the community, right?
Right.
You have to adjust with the times, right? You can't expect people to stay in a realm where, you know, certain people understand. We have to evolve, and evolving education, no matter what platform is on, is extremely important if we want people to retain that information.
Yeah.
Obviously. Yeah. Thank you all. I appreciate y'all's time and just your input and your experience and everything like that. I really, really appreciate you. We appreciate you, and Functional Training Zone appreciate you. So thank you again, and be a guest, teach a class, whatever you want to do. We would appreciate all you guys' input and your guidance to help young people get to where they need to be. Thank you.
Appreciate you guys. Have a good one. Stay safe.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yep.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
It's your boy JR dropping them beats.